Now, the one thing we're going to talk about today, we're going to go into a little different study. We're going to do conflict management. All right? The very first thing that can tear a men's group apart or a church apart is the way we handle conflict. Remember we talked about the circular firing squad last week? That's what happens when one side inside the circle starts pointing at the other one and saying, oh, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with that. And we go into a circular firing squad. These are Roman soldiers. They got the spears. They don't have automatic weapons. So we're not going to be talking about mass thing, but we got people doing that. All right? That's a great story. I was taking care of the church in Indiana and had a CPA as the treasurer. And I was gone one Monday night when they had council meeting. Okay? When I got back, I found out that during that one single meeting when I was gone, they voted as council to take away $1,000 of my salary.
I wasn't nice.
And you say, wow, what useful purpose did that serve? What did that do that would cause someone to promote it, stand up and suggest it, and without even contacting the pastor, and change his wages that much? I was making $1,000 a month, which wasn't a lot of money, and to lose 1/12 of it. Okay? Why? It's this, right here. I'm not getting my due respect as the CPA, as a leader in the church, as the treasurer, and so I'm going to prove to the pastor who's in charge. And it happens frequently, not infrequently. The other thing that can happen is we get a siege mentality. Okay? See how these guys all have their shoulders together and their backs facing the center? When I was in Iowa, I'll give you one story about this one. We had a pastor just south of where I was serving that had a Bible school, private school in their building. And the state of Iowa said, you need to turn in your attendance records for us to be able to certify that you are having enough days of school to qualify you to be a legitimate school in the state of Iowa. And he got all of his congregation, including the men, this way. We're being attacked on every side by the state of Iowa. Okay? And they're trying to take away our religious freedom and making us turn in attendance records. And he had the entire congregation stirred up to the point they were going out and having people sign petitions that they shouldn't have to, because it's giving up their religious freedom to teach in the Christian school in their church. They came to me and asked me if I'd sign the petition. I said, no, I won't sign the petition. I'm a very nice person and everything. I want to be supportive, but I'm not going to sign the petition. And they said, well, if you don't, it may be that our pastor will be arrested. And I said, in that case, that gives me something beneficial I can do. I can go and visit him in the jail. I'll be very supportive. We'll have a scripture reading, a prayer, and, because I know things that you don't know. And they said, what's that? I said, you just built a brand new building. You raised all kinds of money so that you could build this brand new building complete with the Christian school. And I know you had to have those plans submitted to and approved by the building commission and the safety inspectors and the people who approved those permits, gave you the permits to build. Yes, we did. And I know that you had to have electrical inspections, you had plumbing inspections, insect inspections, you had structural inspections, you had all kinds of people come in and have to sign. Didn't you? How is it that that's not an abridgment of your religious freedom, that they have to give you permission and authority. And you're going to fight over this other one that has to talk about your attendance. It doesn't make sense. There's a logical breakdown here. If you're being attacked on every side, you should have put your building up without having any of Iowa's inspectors come and give you approval. If you're going to do the same thinking that you're having with the school. No. Turn in your records. Be approved as a school. And then teach faithfully how to be God's people. But you see, that's a way of motivating people by using conflict. Okay? If I can threaten you from across the circular firing squad, I can maybe get you to come to my way of thinking. If I can make you so frightened that you're thinking that the whole world's coming to get you, right? I'm just going to be silly now, so be patient with me, because we're going to get to the Bible study right here in a second. Did you see what happened this week on the Roman Catholic Church and the health insurance issues that just hit the news here in the last day or so? The Catholic bishops, as a group, decided they're going to take this conflict all the way to the wall, just like we used to do when the Godfather would go to the mattresses. We're going to take this to the mattresses. 28 states already have those rules in place. Why wasn't a 28 state requirement an abridgment of their religious freedom when all of a sudden this is? Do you understand? The logic breaks down. Now, I'm not against the discussion. I'm not against the thing. They're going to come up with a compromise, I'm sure, and everybody's going to be happy. It's going to be taken care of. But do you see how we can actually mobilize people by saying, this is the biggest loss of religious freedom this country's ever faced? And we can motivate people. Well, it's already been that way. Most of the places around through the country. And even if you look at what happened with Governor Romney, it was that way in the state of Massachusetts on the Romney Care part of it. And nobody threw that up as a religious freedom issue. Now, I say that because my goal is to create within us a quiet heart where we can sort out the value of one statement or another, and we can think in much the way that Christ told his disciples how to think. You're going to face conflict, he told them. You are going to face people who just don't like you. They don't like what you have to say. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like you. All right? They're going to take you to court. They're going to try and stop you. They're going to keep trying to shut you up. They're going to do all kinds of things against you. Don't be afraid of that. Don't make up what you're even going to say in front of the judge. Why?
You'll be supplied.
Because I'm going to supply you the words. The Stephen sermon is a perfect example of God's words provided at exactly the time you need. Did he win his case? No. I mean, he came up a little short on the verdict. Okay? But, you see, we need to be able to think clearly to be faithful to what Jesus Christ called us to do. Conflict is going to happen. If you look at your sheet here, we're just going to run down through here in a second. No, shoot. We're going to run down through here, and then we're going to use that to kind of make your notes on where the scriptures are that we look at. There's never going to be a time when we're free of all conflicts. Get used to it. One of the first things I do with my premarital couples when we start getting ready for their marriage vows is I take them through how to fight a fair fight. And you know how I misquote just a little bit when Paul says, I fought the good fight, I kept the faith, I finished the course. So I change it a little bit. So you have to fight the good fight, all right? Because conflict is going to happen in a marriage. It's just going to be that way. And surveys tell us that if we as a church teach people how to fight well, It sounds funny. Fight? Well, we shouldn't fight at all. Isn't that the way? No, we fight creatively because conflict's going to happen. And so to follow the 10 rules that we give them and we go down through into practice means that they have the tools that they need to survive the conflict and let it build their relationships. Had a couple that I put together 25 years ago came down and spent an evening with us just 3 weeks ago. They still remember the lessons on the 10 rules of how to fight a good fight. Because it's so important. You can't have two people in the same relationship without having tensions and stresses and conflict. A silly story. I had a guy 72 years old. I put him together with a lady in her mid-50s, something like that. I said, you have to go through the sessions if you want me to have the wedding ceremony for you. He said, what can you teach me about being married? I've lived married my whole life. I said, yeah, but you haven't been married to her, so you better get prepared, because it's going to be a whole different ride than what you had before. She's a whole different lady.
I thought there was only 2 words to be successful in marriage.
Sorry, dear.
No, you're right.
You're right. Well, but you'll find that you get unhappy pretty fast if you just keep repeating those words over and over again. And I'll show you here in a second. But I tell them all the same things. I have the same pattern. By the time we get to the last session, I will know you so well that I'll be able to pull the right buttons, push the right strings, pull. Yeah, you got the picture. And I'll get you in an argument. Then we'll see her. You practice doing it right. Okay? And so finally we got to the last session. They said, well, why don't you have the last session over at our house? It's a few days before the wedding. We'll have it at the house we've got together, and we'll have our last session over there. I said, sure, fine. So I went over to the house on the day for the last session, and I knocked on the door. Nobody came to the door. I knocked on the door again. Nobody came to the door. Pounded on the door. I knew they had to be there. And she came to the door, tears running down. I mean, mascara dripping off her skin chin. I mean, it was weeping. We had a terrible, terrible fight. It's all off. We've called it off. We can't go on. We've said terrible things to each other. And she said, even to the point where she passed away 10 years later, never will forget the sound of my laughter as I said, okay, now it's time to get down and get busy, because that's exactly where we're supposed to be this week. You see? And I sat down in their family room and I said, let me ask you, asked the fellow. Just came out of the hospital last week. Did you say the one thing that we promised each other would never, ever, ever, ever come out of your mouth? And he hung his head and he said, it was the first thing I said. And I turned to her and I said, and we made a promise that you were never, ever, ever going to say da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And she said, I said it just as soon as he said the other and we were into it. I said, see? Now we have to remember what the 10 rules are, because conflict's going to happen. If we do this again, that's going to be a problem. But we don't have to. Within minutes, we were laughing about it, and tears were all wiped away, and we were back up and going, and we had to learn how to do it. So there will always be conflict. We have to know how to do it. We will understand best how to be helpers if we understand Jesus and how he worked with people. And once we learn from his example, we can follow it. Conflict is not automatically a bad thing. It's a normal part of life. Avoiding conflict builds up tremendous internal turmoil, internal stress. You can't just say yes, dear, every single time, because you have thoughts and feelings and needs besides. But you have to have it creatively. So it's not automatically a good thing. It's something that we learn how to do and take care of it. We'll look at the Bible study here in just a second. We find that seldom people who don't know how to handle conflict don't come up with very good solutions, and they don't last very long until they fall apart. So if we want to build a stronger relationship, we have to know how to deal with it. Okay? In your conflict, don't sin. All right? That goes goes without saying, but we do it anyway. All right? In conflict, don't try to win. It's not a basketball game. The person who scores the most points usually loses in this one. All right? Because if you try and win to get the upper hand, you just make everybody else miserable. And then that comes back to haunt you. All right? Do what's right. It is an opportunity to learn about yourself and what drives you. Conflict is a tremendous educational experience. If you step back after a conflict and say, now, why did I say that? Why did I feel that? What was I thinking? You will learn more about yourself than any college professor can teach you. It gives you a chance to learn about the other person on the other side. If you listen, you will find that they are telling you what's driving them, what they hold as important, what their values are, what their emotional, what their maturity level is. We had one fellow one time that about every 6 months, he'd get mad, he'd pick up his tools and throw them in the back of his truck and drive away, working for the wood shop. And the boss kept saying, this is unbelievable. What did we do? I said, he doesn't have very good negotiating skills. That's the only way he can make his point, that he's upset. Maybe now we can sit down and we can talk with him. And every time he'd get his tools back out, put them back on the bench, and away we'd go again after we'd settled the issue. But he didn't know how to talk about it. And he didn't know, so he just had to stop and take a time to listen to him. And then we learn how God works. Now, how do we get that point? All right? Just take your Bibles for a minute and turn to Acts 5, 1 to 10. Acts, the 5th chapter, 1 to 10. It's a story of the first real conflict inside the church. Okay? It was a conflict that God himself sort of engineered the answer to it. Okay? It is the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and they came to Peter and they said, here's the money we've gotten from the sale of our property, and this is the whole thing, so we want to get credit on our taxes for the entire amount. I'm not sure they said it quite that way, but that was, the gist of it is, we want credit in everybody's opinion of us for this amount, but it's not the whole amount. And so God took care of it in his own special way and just removed them. But it caused tremendous impact inside the community of faith. Don't mess with God. He knows if you're not being honest, if you're not being truthful. He knows when we are trying to play games with him. Okay? First conflict. Second conflict. Acts 6, 1 to 5. Flip that over. And what's the next conflict? There are a group of Greek widows that are not being taken care of well. Apparently a bunch of the widows were being taken care of and their needs were being met. But there was a subgroup within that said, we aren't having the same respect, we aren't being treated the same, equitable treatment, we are not being met. Now, I don't know what the reason was. I don't have any idea. I'm not going to speculate. But the point is, how did the church solve that conflict? What does yours say right above that section of the scripture? They choose the seven. The seven what? They came up with a new name.
Appointed a committee.
They appointed a committee.
But
But you see how they appointed a committee of 7 to very carefully look at and evaluate each set of needs within the new body of Christ. And so that they could be fair and equitable. They came up with a brand new solution. They've never had a board of deacons before. And there's been a lot of churches that wish they didn't have a board of deacons since. But, you know, you get my humor. It's just, when we do things well, like these guys did, they chose the right people, with the right gifts, with the right spirit, with the right heart. That was the end of the conflict. If you look at the discussion inside of this solution, the apostles had to weigh their priorities very carefully. What has God given us to do? Remember, it was the 12 apostles who handed out the bread to the feeding of the 5,000. So why is it not their job now? They were the ones doing a lot of the legwork in preparing for the Passover and everything that they had on the Last Supper. Why isn't their job now? Because God had appointed them to a different role. And now they had to find someone who could step in and they could take their hands off of the role of passing out bread. Very, very important. This is a very good conflict resolution right here. Okay? Now we're going to step forward again. Acts 9, 26 and 27. Acts 9, 26 and 27. If you want to write these down on your paper, it's Acts 5, 1 to 10, Acts 6, 1 to 5, Acts 5, 1 to 10, Acts 6, 1 to 5, Acts 9, 26 and 27. 26 and 27 is a very interesting story. Paul comes to Jerusalem to explain that he has been miraculously and wondrously saved. Nobody believes him. They think he's trying to suck them into a trick that would expose the inner leadership of the church so that he could persecute them even further. And then one guy, who happens to be nicknamed the Son of Encouragement, all right? We see his name written down as Barnabas. Says, you know, I've checked this guy out, and I think he's for real. I believe I can stand up and vouch for him. He's okay. And there was a conflict within the church. Do you believe him or not? And what did they do? They put somebody in charge of doing the investigation that had a very, very sensitive heart, who knew how to evaluate, who had a discerning spirit, one of the several gifts that God gives us. And he could hear inside of this man who had been such a terrible persecutor of the church. He was now for real. His heart was new. Okay? And because they had selected a person wisely, like they selected the 7, who had the right skills, who had the right heart.
Who selected him?
Well, he was actually kind of selected by himself.
That's right.
Yeah. He stood up and said, I believe that this guy's telling the truth. And the apostles believed. And that settled the issue. I mean, it wasn't possible for Saul to stay in Jerusalem. He would have been executed pretty quickly, I think, but they at least believed that he was the genuine heart, that God had worked in a miraculous way. Okay? So the conflict was resolved when they all came to the same understanding. He was now one of them. Okay? Now we're going to jump over to one of the next conflicts, Acts 11, 1 to 3. Acts 11, 1 to 3. One of the things that could have torn the church completely apart. And this is when God's Spirit gave Peter a vision, and Cornelius' men were standing at the gate waiting to go take Peter to the first Gentile's house, who was going to become a Christian, against every teaching they had ever been given as Jews. Someone asked me, he said, why don't we worship on the Sabbath day anymore? There's a lot of stuff that was a part of the Jewish observance we don't do anymore. This is one of them. We don't go into a Gentile's house, no matter what the reason is, and yet Peter was trying to get resolution here. And it was immediate conflict. As soon as he got back to Jerusalem, what was the first thing he ran into? What did it say? Verse 3. They criticized him. Boom! Why in the world would you do such a dumb thing? And inside the church there was this earthquake. So how did they resolve the conflict? They went back to the building blocks. They went back to the instructions of Jesus Christ. Do what I've told you. Do what I've shown you. Follow, remember what I've taught you. And the Spirit of God kept pouring out. Do you remember a Roman soldier by the name that was called the centurion? We talked about that last week. Under authority. The Roman centurion was Gentile. There you go. But I know you, Jesus, and I can see that you are under authority. But you're also a person of authority in exactly the same chain of command that I am. And I know that all you have to do is say the word and it's done. Okay? Was he part of the Jewish community? No. Was he one of God's chosen people? Was he even... Let's go backwards just a little bit. Part of the rise of the New Testament church, the Acts church, was because God had been laying the foundation all through the known world. If you study history, you study church history, if you study what happened in the early church period, you will find that many, many, many places of Jewish worship will have columns that they have found, have the contributors' names written on. Well, they didn't get brass plaques like we might today. Years ago, they said, we're going to put your name on a paving brick if you send us so much money. Well, they didn't put your name on a paving brick. They carved your name into the pillar of the synagogue that you were supporting. Of those who loved God. If you look at what Paul did by going into the synagogues in each new community where he served, he taught not only the Jewish leaders, but there were a whole congregation of people who had come to love God, were worshiping with the Jewish community, were learning about God's Word in the Old Testament Torah, were learning about what God's plan of salvation was going to be, and we're all sitting there with a passion already in their heart for something that was missing from their own cultural worship. And when the message of Jesus Christ came, it was like, boom, there's the answer we've been looking for. Was it all the Jews that came rushing into the new church? Well, a lot of them did. But there were a whole group of people that Paul refers to as, and those who love God. They were the lovers of God. And their names, many of them, are etched into the columns as they gave money and contributed money to the synagogues in which they were attending. Okay? Now we see that that centurion could very well have been one of those who loved God. If you go to Capernaum, where this story takes place, I mean, the story of the centurion I'm talking about. I'm sorry, I switched on you, and I shouldn't have done that. But when you look at the story of the centurion, it was at Capernaum. There is a synagogue in Capernaum. It's more or less in ruins now. But the stone carving shows a Roman chariot and horses carved into the artwork around the top of the synagogue in Capernaum.
Because he was supposed to.
It was a recognition of his major contribution to that community. It's thought. The only reason it could be there, it's connected to Capernaum with Jesus, and this is the man of great faith. Why would you do that? It's not a Jewish symbol. In fact, there's rules against you putting that kind of thing on a Jewish house of worship. But, you see, God's already prepared the ground. He'd already been working in the heart of the centurion. He'd been working in the heart of Cornelius. And all of a sudden, Peter walks in. And to be very honest with you, from a preacher's standpoint, he only got part of his sermon out before the Lord moved in a wonderful way. And the Spirit fell on that house. And they accepted Jesus. And I think Peter was more surprised because he hadn't kind of gotten to the conclusion yet. I was waiting to really pull this. No, it's already done. And God moved in a powerful way. And the words were just like it happened to us. Okay? Now, I'm going to jump ahead to the next conflict. Acts 15, 1 to 4. Acts 15, 1 to 4. Oh, by the way, they did resolve that because they did go back and listen to what Jesus Christ had told them, and they heard what had happened at Cornelius' house, and they were fine, and it was resolved, and the church began to minister to the Gentile community, and it became a whole new ministry, complete with Paul and Barnabas going to Antioch and continuing to work up there. All right? But now we get to Acts 15, 1 to 4. They come back. The Gentile Christians are becoming Christians all around the whole area. But now there's a conflict, and they have the first ecumenical summit, I guess you might call. And they all got the leaders of the church together in Jerusalem, and they had to decide what they were going to do about these Christians who weren't really becoming complete Jews and still being believers. So what are they going to require of the new Christians that are coming into the faith? All right? And so they've got this whole conflict. And Paul and Barnabas are up in front of the group of church leaders, and they're discussing and they're debating how God has worked and how he has moved in powerful ways and how he is working in the hearts of people all throughout the known world that they touched. And what did they finally do? They resolved the conflict?
Circumcision.
No, they're not going to require circumcision. They wrote a letter. And they said, we believe, here's what the new Gentile believers should do. But it wasn't anything like what they'd been talking about before. It wasn't becoming Jews first and then becoming Christian, or becoming Jews after they had accepted Jesus Christ. It is not by works, lest any man should boast. It is by faith alone. Okay? So they come to that conclusion at the end of the 15 big ecumenical meeting. Okay? Now we go to the last one I'm going to have on my list. There's more we could go to, but these are just the list of the first 15 chapters of Acts. Acts 15, 36 to 40. (36 to 40). 15, 36 to 40. If you look at that, you will find the two wonderful men, gifted men of God, wonderful, useful instruments in God's hand, butted heads. And there was a sharp conflict between who? Paul and Barnabas. Over what was the issue?
Mark or not?
That little stinker went home in the middle of our last trip and caused us to have to find other replacements and and he let us down, and I don't want to do that again. I don't want to have to go through that turmoil. That Mark's nothing but a crybaby. Or, well, I guess I made that up. Okay? But it was the team of Paul and Barnabas was the ideal team. Gentlemen, I want you to understand, when we get back next week, we're going to talk about how God puts us together with our gifts. these were two men who had exactly the right complementary gifts to be the most effective team you could imagine on the road in evangelism. One was a dynamic, fire-breathing, passionate. Back where I grew up, we have apple orchards. And when it gets to a particular time of the year, when the apples are really ready, all you have to do is grab the trunk of the tree and shake it a little bit, and apples start coming down from all up in through there. You don't even have to get the ladder or anything else. All you have to do is kind of just shake the tree, and the apples will fall. Paul was the tree shaker. He would just debate all the way to the morning hours until the sun came up. He would debate with people who wanted to talk about Jesus all the way through the whole night. He was tireless. He was so tireless that some people fell asleep. One kid even fell out the window and he brought back to life. He'd just been worn out by the discussion of Paul because he just never gave up. And right alongside him is Barnabas. And he's the apple catcher. All right? He's got his robes all out like this, like a big bushel basket, and he's running around underneath the tree that Paul is shaking, trying to make sure that the apples don't get bruised when they get close to landing on the ground. All right, so that's the picture I've got in my mind of these two people. One with this apostolic gift to stand up and say, "This is what God sent me to do, and I know there's going to be results. You just got to listen to my message." And the other one sitting there going, yeah, okay, but don't get bruised in the process. Let me encourage you and bring you into the family, and I'll teach you along. I'll give you the encouragement. And here's how it all fits together. You got questions. I know you got questions. Paul leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Come on, let's go over here in the corner, and we'll sit down and we'll talk. We'll keep you going. I'll get you straightened out so that you can understand what he's trying to say. And between the two men, they had the perfect partnership. Boy, did they have conflict. Why?
So they're in.
They were men. Yeah. And they wanted to be in the full exercise of their God-given gifts. And Barnabas, in the exercise of his gifts, is getting in the way of Paul giving his gifts the full reign to do his thing. And between the two of them, they just, and if you read the words, I don't know how your particular translation is saying it, but they really came to words. This was harsh, because Barnabas felt so strongly that doing the very same thing that he'd done to bring Paul into the fellowship, that now was a major leader in the church, was just as important that he use his gifts for Mark as it was for when he used them for Paul. That was important too. That was important because they could handle it. They actually handled it very, very well. Let's go back and get the last of the lesson. How did they resolve it? No. They found the missing piece that the other one had brought to the team and brought in two complementary people to fill the spot that the other one had filled. John Mark eventually became the new Paul. The young generation Paul.
Almost what?
Not quite. I mean, you can't say it, but he became, according to Paul's letters, a respected.
He was a Cola guy, faithful Cola.
A respected man.
But
no, you are right. You are right. Conflicts often lead to separations. But it doesn't have to be that way.
That's right.
It doesn't have to be. If we understand, remember our first lesson. Remember the clamp? All right? Respect, appreciation for the others, the ones that we may not understand or we think may not be doing exactly like they should, but we have to understand how we respect and appreciate and approve of the other.
That's when we just step back and listen.
There's where you can listen. If you don't respect, if you think that you're let's say, losing the argument. I hate to use that phrase because it's the win-lose thing again. And you don't really feel like a winner, and you feel like you had something worthwhile to say, but nobody's listening. And you push, and your voice gets a little louder, and you push just a little harder, and you push just a little more emphatic, and you may even use a word or two that are more emphatic and stronger language than you really would do in other circumstances. And then all of a sudden, well, okay. And there can be separation.
So conflict can go both ways. It can be good and it can be, because you can learn from conflict if you step back and listen.
Absolutely.
And you don't lose, but you win.
You win when you learn something. You win when you learn something. And that's the reason conflict can be good, is if we give it a chance. And sometimes it takes a while. I mean, no one thing is solved in one session. I mean, you have to have something pretty minor for you to be able to get one session and, okay, now we're all done, that's taken care of. No, these are long-term things that we have to work our way through. These two men did not come to this point of this sharp disagreement that day. This has been building for a while. They're getting ready for the next trip. And now all of the accumulation of the differences between them. And so Paul chooses another Barnabas by the name of Silas. And Barnabas chooses another spokesman in John Mark, and they go to work. Again, inside the family, within the framework of what their ministry has been given, within the will of God. Now one preaching team becomes two, and they can reach more territory, and they don't have to carry baggage left over from behind them of unfinished business. Gentlemen, what I'm trying to do is that, I've taught a whole lot of people through the years how to think like Christians. That's been the framework that I've used. How do you think like a Christian? And back when I first ran these sessions in the church in Indiana, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of tension in our state, in our community. They were trying to... there was a whole thing about allowing abortion, and people were all charged up about that. And there were things on the ballot about permitting gambling and horse racing in the state of Indiana, and lotteries, and all kinds of things were all going on in discussion, and everybody was mad at each other. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar to what our community, our world, our nation is doing right now? What's the reason? They're mad. They're just raving mad. There's a reason why being so angry is sometimes considered insanity, because you give away your brain when you get that charged up. Gentlemen, we're not raving lunatics here, but we do live in a very uptight world. And our nation we just spent $16 million just from one party in the state of Florida talking about how we're not supposed to appreciate and look up to or approve of this other person on the ballot. And how terrible they are, and liars and thieves and scoundrels of every different kind. And we haven't even gotten into the election yet.
What's it going to be then?
$1 billion each they're going to have to do nothing. You know what they were frightened of today on the news program? There wouldn't be enough news spots on all the different channels for all the advertisements they want to buy going into the election.
We ought to put them all in one channel so we can.
Now, gentlemen, I'm going to say it this way because I'm not trying to do politics, but we live in a very highly charged world. If we don't know how to sort out our own heart, if we don't know how to sort out what is the biblical foundation for what to believe and how to hold on, we will get caught up. The temptation's too great, and we'll get sucked into it. Now, I didn't get my friend straightened out. He's still quoting Numbers 24 or something or other, and I have to say, you don't win every battle, but you got to stay centered. You have to know what you believe in a calm, rational way. And that means that you know that conflict shouldn't frighten you. Frightening you into going back to that foundation. I feel like a loser. I feel like I'm not winning this argument, so I'm a loser. All right? And we can say conflict is the point where it really, where the rubber hits the road and our fears come out to the surface again. All right? They come up from where they've been buried, and we feel pretty comfortable most of the time, and then all of a sudden we just feel like we're right up against it again. All right? But then the other part of it is, we know Zacchaeus was. He was the chief tax collector and one of the main trade routes down through Jericho. And we know he was wrong. All right? But still in his heart, the reason why he was in the tree, with all of his wealth, with all of his fancy clothes and big house, still felt like a loser.
And we still have those today.
And Jesus said, I'm going to your house, and just saying those words meant, I think you're a winner. I approve of you. I give you encouragement. I want to be supportive of you. All right? It's a whole different way of thinking. And when good, normal, everyday church people start thinking in new ways,